Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmus, and welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. I got some questions on email from a guy recently who had attended one of my seminars around the topic of the self being an illusion. And I think these questions are great because they point to many of the misunderstandings that a lot of people have around the self being an illusion. So, what does it really mean to say that the self is an illusion? First of all, remember this: saying that something is an illusion doesn't mean that there is nothing there. Illusion points to things not quite being the way they appear. So there's something there, there's something going on. It's just not what you think it is. So keep that in mind. So the first thing he asks is, well, if there's no self, there's no you. So like, why care, or why not just go to war, and do stupid things? Now, when saying that the self is an illusion, the emphasis should be on there is no such thing as a self. There's no noun, there's no entity. There's no CEO in here who's making decisions and choices and thinking up thoughts and constructing feelings. There's no such thing as a volitional, separate, stable, permanent self. That's an illusion. That's something that you can experientially explore and fail to find in a way that's compelling, right? Now, this doesn't mean that there isn't a selfing process going on. It's a verb, it's an activity. So with every single human being that I've explored these topics with, there's a selfing process, there's self-referential thinking, there's the activity of making distinctions and setting boundaries and kind of negotiating what is me and what is not me. That's a psychological process that matures over time. It's not a noun, it's not an entity, it's not a thing, it's a process, it's a verb, it's an activity. So that's the first thing to know. The second thing to know is that this doesn't mean that there's no you in the sense of there's no being. No one's suggesting that you deny your being. It's just that you're not the selfing process. You're not a collection of thoughts and feelings. If you meditate and explore this, you'll be able to discover that what you fundamentally are is just life itself, experience itself, moment to moment. There's no separate I that's somehow creating it or witnessing it or observing it. This is a really important point. So what you are then is prior to thought. It's during thought. It's between thought. And whenever a thought or an emotion or a mood state dissolves, being itself doesn't dissolve. And that shows that no objective experience, meaning no mood state, no thought, no feeling, no emotion, is essential to what you are. So there's an opportunity in meditation and an inquiry to discover that what you are is prior to thought. You're not the selfing process. That's just another process that arises and dissolves in awareness, moment to moment. And seeing that loosens the identification with it. There's no, you know, when people talk about awakening or becoming enlightened, right? Like, so Jurgen, this Jurgen character can't awaken. or become enlightened, because Jürgen is a thought construct. It's an imaginary thought construct that arises and dissolves moment by moment. There's there's no thing like Jürgen in there. That's an illusion. So by looking for the I, or the self, and failing to find it, what's left is just experience, consciousness itself unfolding moment to moment. So things still get done, there's just no one doing it. The activities of deciding and choosing and making distinctions and all that stuff still occur, but there's no separate independent author behind it. Now, regarding, so why wouldn't you? So he said, why wouldn't you just go to Putin, or why wouldn't you just go to war? Well, this imaginary Jürgen, this sense of an I that arises and dissolves, is really an afterthought. It's really an ad hoc entity, or an ad hoc process, so to speak, that's not really initiating or responsible for anything. But that doesn't mean that the activity of personality isn't occurring. So a lot of people confuse this sort of realization with becoming bland or devoid of any personality or any emotion or anything, like non-existence, so to speak. If you spend time around people who have had these sorts of realizations, and people don't really have these realizations, but you'll discover that there's often strong personalities at play. Like, the activity of personality is still occurring, in the same way that the activities of digestion and cell division and temperature regulation and metabolism and storing and retrieving memories are still occurring. Personality is often freer to express itself because there's less noise in the system. That's an important thing to consider. So, for example, of course, I never met Ramani Maharshi or Nisargadatta Maharaj, but these are typical. There are people who have met these guys and written about them, and both of these had profound realizations, but at the level of personality were, by written accounts, profoundly different. You had Ramana Maharshi, who from what I've read seemed like a very peaceful and kind of benign, benevolent type of personality. And then you had Nisargadatta Maharaj, who was like a lot of anger outbursts, fierce, a lot of intensity, very bold, very direct, chain smoking, like very different activity of personality. So that doesn't necessarily change at all. Another question here is, well, he says, I get that the no self thing can be very useful for negative emotions and suffering. Of course, if you look at what we call negative emotions, you'll see that there are a bunch of body sensations, there's some cognitions, and there's this I story. I'm depressed, I'm angry, I'm anxious, I'm miserable. That the experience seemed glued to, or seemed to be revolving around. So the activity or process of looking for that I that's anxious or angry, or which the experience revolved around, and failing to find it pulls the rug and weakens the intensity of those experiences. But he says, well, what about happiness? What about positive experiences? It seems like it would pull the rug out of that as well. And this is also based upon a misunderstanding, because life is still flowing and happiness is innate. Peace and happiness is our essential nature. So if you ask someone, when do you most feel like yourself? People often use notions such as, I was really myself, or I was the most fulfilled, or the opposite, I wasn't myself. That wasn't me. I just lost complete touch with who I am. The irony is that when people feel the least like themselves, there's often a lot of internal dialogue, they're self conscious, there's a lot of selfing activity going on. But when people feel the most like themselves, there's the lack of that. There's a lack of the persona. There's the lack of the imaginary character. There's just the conversation taking place instead of the sense of an I having a conversation. There's just the tennis match. There's just the boxing match. There's just the lovemaking. There's just the experience itself, versus experience filtered through the lens of an imaginary character that's somehow doing things or making things happen. So when the self-referential thinking slows down, there's the experience of just flow and being in the zone, and there's an innate happiness in that. So we have a tendency to attribute happiness to objects, to relationships, to accomplishments, but so no matter what people say they want, if you ask them, if you had that, what is it that you think you'd get? And the answer is, I think I'd be happier. I think I'd be more fulfilled. I'd be at peace. Now, if you watch this, you'll notice that when people get what they want, when they accomplish the goal, the seeking activity and the resisting activity of the mind, or the thinking process, comes to an halt. The mind kind of undoes itself temporarily, and then the happiness that is our nature shines through. The mind starts up again and falsely misattributes the experience as coming from the object or the substance or the relationship. And the hamster wheel continues. But our happiness and peace of mind does not derive from thoughts or emotional states, or accomplishments or relationships, or these sorts of things. This is a fundamental misunderstanding. Like if you watch the sunset and there's no thinking going on, there's no sense of a persona in the sunset. There's just the watching. There's just the experience. And during those moments, we might attribute the happiness to watching the sunset, but it really is just our being itself, shining. And of course, the sunset isn't really separate from that. It is that. So that's something else to consider as well. Let's see here. What else did we have here? Yeah, well, why want to be a better person? Well, if you look at a young child, this sense of an I from what I've read, you can't really interview two-year-olds. You don't really know what's going on in there. But from what I've read, the sense of an I first begins to emerge at like age 2, something like that. But notice before that the impulse to begin to walk and stand up and develop language and all these sorts of things just occur. Perceiving just occurs. Hearing just occurs. There are forces in us that arise to develop certain capacities, right? Cell division is occurring. If you look into developmental psychology, you see that in children all over the world, irrespective of culture, the process of starting to walk, the process of starting to talk for the most part, socializing, beginning to distance themselves from their family, very universal. And if you look at adults as well, there are these qualitatively different stages of development that we tend to pass through if we develop. All of this activity where thinking becomes less black and white, there's more nuance, there's different distinctions, different set of boundaries, new integrations. All of this is just occurring. But there's no imaginary character called Jürgen behind the reins doing it. That's the illusion. So whatever emerges is going to emerge. But it may emerge with way less noise in the system. Like, imagine a life that most of us live, where most of the thinking and feeling and activity is in service of this seemingly self-character that needs to be validated and needs to accomplish things and needs to be in control and so on and so forth. Versus a more accurate perception of life just unfolding and being it. Right? It's a very different, like, perceptual shift. Now, in my own life, the activity of selfing is occurring, and the activity of identification is still occurring, and sometimes it looks as if I am identical to that. So, for example, I recently had some challenges in my marriage, and in that particular instance, I really looked like a self, and my wife really looked like a self, and it just turned into a shit show for a while. So, but there's also this knowing that it's not really quite like that, right? But like, how much of the time it looks one way versus the other way really influences what emerges. So notice something else too. I mean, when people are in flow, when there's no sense of a persona separate from the experience, behavior and action, tends to flow better. Think about a conversation you've had where you seem to be in your head looking for validation and approval versus just the conversation unfolding. The conversation seems to be better. Now, a final question I got is, because I used the example of, I've got this from the meditation teacher, Adyashanti, where I said to people, are you the sunshine? I sometimes ask my clients, and I did this in the seminar, and of course everyone says no. For people, it looks as if they are their thinking and feeling in their body. But the point being that there really is no you as a distinct separate entity from the sunshine and the oxygen and the water. Whatever you are as an expression arises as one thing, right? So in that sense, we could say that you are the sunshine, you are the oxygen, you are that which everything arises out of and the experiencing of it, right? But I also ask the question, to people, are you this tennis ball? With the notion that, if you can see it or take it as objects, and if I can take the tennis ball away without your being dissolving, you're not the tennis ball. They're both true in the sense. It's the latter is a useful first step, in that for most of us, consciousness is so seemingly veiled by all thoughts and feelings that it seems as if what we fundamentally are is identical to thoughts and feelings. And in that instance, it's very useful to make a distinction between consciousness and its contents. However, if you want to deepen the realization, you want to collapse that distinction. Like, ultimately, it really is all one thing. It really is consciousness just taking the temporary shape of hearing and seeing and feeling and so on and so forth. So anyways, I hope these clarifications were of some use to you. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to post them where you find the video. Know that I do see clients from all over the world, on Skype. So if you're looking to make changes or you're looking for mentoring or seminars, you can reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. Thanks for listening.